Hello everyone, my name is Fear Dragon and welcome to another one of my weekly vlogs. Today we are going to be talking about pressure and what I like to call the intense factor. Now, for those who are members or have been members of the StarCraft community for a while, you may or may not remember a player named Intense. Now, Intense was formerly IVD. I can't remember what teams he ended up going to after that. But he was this North American Terran player who had a lot of promise. A lot of people really would look at this guy and be like, man, this guy is he's going to go places. He's doing really, really well. He's improving at a rapid rate. Uh, but he would kind of flop a lot. It became like it came to the point where eventually people would just expect him to get over to like the qualifying match or something, or go really, really far in a bracket and then lose in one of his most important matches, even sometimes to players that he really should have just been beating. And the really funny thing about Intense was that he would perform a lot better if he had just come off of like a long retirement break. He hadn't played StarCraft for like 2 or 3 months. Maybe he'd played like 3 games during those 2, 3 months. And then he would show up for some random WCS qualifier and he would nearly qualify or actually qualify. But when he was practicing hard, constantly playing his heart out and doing his best to improve, he would bomb out in like the first round of a tournament or like the second or third round versus a player that he really should have been beating. And it's kind of coined to me what I call the intense factor, which is there's this weird phenomenon that happens with a lot of players. You might actually see a lot of this happen on Twitter and Team Liquid and random other places where players will downsell themselves, and in reality, like a lot, sometimes it'll just seem like them being humble or like overly self-critical, but a lot of the times it's almost a strategic tactic. They're trying to downplay their own expectations for how they'll do in an event or how they're doing in general, because it relieves some of the pressure. And it's a really funny thing because it causes a whole other like sort of feeling around that player of like, oh man, like I think Snoot is another player who does this. Maybe Snoot has other ulterior reasons for doing it. Maybe he is just being very self-critical, but I feel like Snoot is one of those players where everyone will look at him and be like, man, this guy's like the forward hope. He's so freaking good. He's one of the best players in the non-Korean scene, and sometimes he's even really good player compared to the Koreans. But you'll always see him constantly like selling himself short and, saying like, man, I'm playing like such trash. Like, God, should I just retire? Like all these kind of like really negative thoughts. But I think that a lot of it is just relieving the pressure. And there's this really interesting book. It's called Mind Gym, for those who are ever interested. It's one of the most awesome books I've read in the past few years, recommended by Artosis himself. But there is this chapter in this book called the pressure principle. And it's all revolves around this idea. It's a quote from this guy named Scott Hamilton. Says, under pressure, you can perform 15% better or worse. And I think a lot of StarCraft players right now, just because we don't really have a ton of, sports psychology training. By the way, it's a book about sports psychology. It's called Mind Gym. But a lot of StarCraft players don't really have a ton of sports psychology training or anything. They don't have these coaches. They don't have people kind of guiding them. So the way that a lot, or I would say a majority of players end up handling that pressure is really poorly. So, as the quote says, under pressure you can perform 15% better or worse. And most players tend to perform worse under the pressure. So they just try and get rid of it. But when you just try and evaporate the pressure by setting low expectations for yourself, saying, I'm not going to make a deep run, so what the hell, I'll just give it a shot, and then you kind of play without pressure, you're also missing out on the opportunity to play 15% better. And I think that's where a lot of the absolute best players end up finding their stride and, really putting out a magnificent performance. Those are the players that you really end up remembering and thinking, wow, that guy is ridiculously good. Those are the people who really perform when you're in a clutch situation. And I think those are the really memorable ones as well. I feel like there's a big lost opportunity for so many players. And I'm not saying it's an easy thing to do, to just learn how to play better under pressure, right? It's a very easy thing to talk about and difficult thing to actually learn how to do in practice. But there's definitely a lost opportunity, I think, for a lot of players who just try and erase the pressure rather than trying to learn how to use it. And it really does bring me down. It's kind of like this train of thought of, oh man, I wonder when, if ever, StarCraft players will end up getting more of that sort of formal training, or well, they'll start even just maybe not even like getting coach or anything, but start looking into sports psychology books or anything like that on their own and start helping to deal with this. I know there's a lot of other players that in the StarCraft scene. I'm more familiar with like a lot of the NA players and stuff, but like I know Game Time is one of the players that really thinks and struggles a lot with his own like psychology for going into his matches and everything. Intense was another player that I mentioned. Like there are a ton of players that really could benefit from a lot of this stuff, and it talks about a lot of other things as well. But I've always found the whole concept of utilizing pressure to perform better at something as a really interesting one. And I feel like that's definitely something that's pretty cross applicable outside of just like the competitive StarCraft or esports environment. I mean, everyone deals with pressure in their daily lives. And while there are to differing degrees and different types of pressure, sometimes it's a very sharp, pointed pressure at a very particular situation. So it doesn't last for a long time, but it's a very immense pressure. Sometimes it's sort of that dull pressure where you have it constantly ongoing for weeks at a time or something. And you have to deal with those kinds of pressure in different ways. But I think that it's something that everyone can sort of learn how to do a little bit better. Even in just your StarCraft matches, people will feel the pressure for, man, I want to perform better because I want to move up in rank. I am trying to play my absolute best on this ladder game, or I'm playing in like a small tournament. Maybe it's just an in-game StarCraft tournament or something. I want to get that trophy. And there is that pressure. And learning how to play with it can help you perform better. At a minimum, learning how to erase that pressure or how to erase a portion of that pressure can also be helpful. So anyways, that was just sort of my interesting ramble on about a kind of interesting topic. So let me know what you guys think in the comments, and I'll see you guys tomorrow.